and get this party started. My name is Kelsey Hensey. I am founder and editor-in-chief of Fathom, and I'm so thrilled for all of y'all to be here. This is our second one of these, and maybe you attended the first one too, and you're here for your second one, which would be awesome. But we are excited to start doing this more regularly, kind of quarterly, more or less. Every time we release about 3 new themes, we'll have another one of these meetings. So welcome to our second one. We're getting hopefully better at them along with you. And we have not just me from Fathom today, we also have Rachel Welcher, who is our poetry editor. See her there. And then we have Sophie Demuth, who is our associate editor. She's also a copy editor. She's a jack of all trades, pretty amazing too. Jed with the nice beard right there. He's a senior editor at Fathom. If you have submitted a piece of work with us before, it's pretty likely you've heard from me or Jed. We do a lot of those. And if you've submitted poetry, you've heard from Rachel. Not from me, because this is not what I do well at all. I would be in the Lana Del Rey category when it comes to poetry. So you're glad you hear from her. But we're so excited you're here. I'll give you a little idea of where we're headed tonight, this evening, and then we'll jump right in. We're going to talk a little bit about when you send in a pitch or a submission, and particularly a piece, how to catch an editor's eye. These tips are going to be general, but we're also going to tell you how to make them Fathom specific. So we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about our 3 themes that we have coming up. We'll talk about things that we would love to see for those themes. And then we'll be happy to take some questions. So Sophie is going to be jumping in and out. If you have a question at any point in time, you can put it in the chat. And if it's super relevant, Sophie will jump in and make sure we don't miss it at that point in time. And if not, we'll just kind of save them to the end and we'll address any questions, bring those forward too. And when we're going through those themes at the end, if you want to say, what about a piece like this? Or what an idea like this? We'd be happy to chat that direction as well. So that is the plan for tonight. So let's do it. How do you catch an editor's eye? I think that as we have talked as an editorial team, as issues are being created, a lot of the things that we're looking for are just things that a lot of different publications would be probably thrilled to see, not just us. So the first one that I want to talk about is that you always pitch your best idea. Always pitch your best idea. I think we have a tendency to think that if our first idea that we have, we get really excited about it and we want to share it with someone instead of maybe thinking it through, see if there's another angle, turning it around on our own before you shoot it to an editor. But when you pitch an idea, you want it to be a story or a thought or an angle that you truly care about, that's really something you're passionate about, that will make your writing really intriguing for your reader. And you want it to be something that your reader will want to read too. So as you're thinking through ideas of things and what to pitch, it might be that you even start working on an idea that you think is a decent idea, a good idea. And as you're working on it, you could come across an even better thought, right? A better big idea for your piece. Any time that you have spent working on figuring out that big idea is worthwhile time spent, right? So we get some people who send something in and say, I didn't think a lot about it. I didn't have a lot of time, or they don't want to waste their time thinking through the idea. That's really the first step. That's not wasted time. That's invested time to get to an even better piece. So pitch the best idea you can. You would rather have time that you feel like was wasted in an investment than submit a piece that is even eventually published that your reader feels like was a waste of time, right? That's the first thing you want to do. And in that vein, on pitching your idea, not only do you want to pitch your best idea, you obviously don't want to pitch your great ideas. Those are the good ones. You want to pitch a idea, period. Your best bet for getting into a publication of any sort is rarely going to be the email that says, I love to write. What can I write about? Your best bet for getting a piece in is sending in a perspective. So come with the perspective. If you develop a long-term relationship with an editor, it might be the kind of thing where maybe they're getting close to a deadline and you can say, hey, are there any holes you'd like filled or something like that? That might end up working for you, but that's a niche, rare, small relationship-driven idea. So if you've not met an editor before, pitch them a perspective. Jed, Rachel, Sophie, anything y'all want to throw in on that topic, pitching your best idea?
I think you covered it pretty well.
I would say oh, go ahead, Jen.
Nope, all you.
Oh, I was just going to say with poems, I don't want to pitch. I want the full poem. So that's the only kind of submission where you don't have to send in a pitch. The reason is because, yeah, I'd rather read your finished product. So don't send in a poem that's half finished. Make it your best final polished poem. And there may be some edits to it, and you want to be open to that, but don't send me something that's in progress if you can help it. I mean, if it's a longer, like epic poem and you just want to see before you finish it, okay, maybe, but in general, I don't want to see poetry pitches. I want the full poem.
Yeah, and I think in that same vein, we get a lot of full piece submissions. And we covered this a little bit when we last did one of these calls, but I'll just reiterate that it really helps to have a pitch, even if you are sending me a full manuscript. Honestly, few of us on the editorial team have the time to read through full-length manuscripts to decide if we're even interested. So your pitch is your absolute best bet in helping us decide if it's something that we want to read. So I will come back to this often. You want to catch an editor's eye, write a good pitch first. Even if you're sending a full manuscript, something you've already worked on and polished. Just a, hey, I wrote this, hope you like it, isn't going to make a good impression.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's great. And Jed said, we talked about this last time. If you were with us last time, you know this, but if what we're not going to do tonight is walk through an in-depth, here's really what Fathom is and what Fathom's looking for right now. That is a recorded session. It's on YouTube. You're welcome to go back and look at that one if you want to see those specifics. So when they reference something from the last time, that is open for you to see, just right there on our YouTube channel. You can find it. So I'm sure we could send the link out to you as well for that one. But yeah, excellent. Okay, so pitching your best idea, make sure you do that. And then the next one is be clever. Another one of a lot of us who are communicators and writers, our first natural reaction when we think about a topic is to reiterate something that we've already seen or already know about, that we already enjoyed. So when you are thinking about something, if you're getting into an idea and you read something somewhere else, or you listened to it on a podcast and it was like, that's really interesting, somebody should write about that, and you're like, I'm going to write about that, I would encourage you to think about why that's interesting to you. Ask questions of your interest. Ask questions of the things that you already enjoyed looking at. And we want to be the kind of place that furthers a thought, right? We want people to think deeper than they're already thinking. So if you've already read it and loved it, we're not looking for a recycled idea. We're wanting you to give that idea some nuance and some depth. So we really want you to be clever, right? Show more than you tell. This is a classic piece of advice that you're going to see on every place that suggests how to be a better writer. Show, don't just tell, right? Particularly if you work in a church and you're a teacher, your first inclination is going to be to tell, right? The people that I am most likely to say, hey, could you work in more showing into your piece, are people who are naturally teachers. They're going to want to give like here's 5 points about this and 5 ways to put it into your life. And we don't publish things like that. And a lot of places will, and you could find a spot that would do that. But for us, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about showing more than telling. A lot of times what we're actually talking about is a story, that you would use a narrative to draw out this idea or this experience to bring someone into a moment with you. That is being clever. That is an interesting way to draw someone in to what it is you want them to think about. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's part of being clever is show us that you understand the landscape of your topic. We will sometimes get pitches that will say, no one is talking about this. And I'm thinking, actually, I saw like 3 of those on Twitter last week, right? They're actually out there. and you can find them pretty easily if you want to look around. Maybe you haven't read about it yet. That's what that statement tells me. What that tells me is you haven't spent a lot of time actually in this topic. That gives me alarm bells for what you're saying might not be furthering a conversation. It might be unknowingly recycling one, right? Show me that you understand the landscape. You can even interact with other things other people have said in your pitch, in your actual piece. Those would help us understand that you're really using your mind when you are putting a piece out there, right? There's not going to find a lot of publications who want the greatest hits of what other people have already written right now, right? You're going to find somewhere where you can give somebody a new idea, a clever thought is going to get you in the door. And if you're doing that, then that's going to get you in the door when your CV can't, right? When you haven't published a lot of places yet, that's going to help you a lot. You're going to have to find that nuanced angle to be able to get your foot in the door. Additions?
Now, I just want to throw this out there that that's not to diminish not a lot, but we often have writers who discover something for the first time for themselves. So it's a realization that they've come to on their own through their own life experiences. We often get pieces about people moving into liturgical denominations and discovering the beauty of liturgy. We get a couple of those almost every single issue. And I don't want to downplay at all the fact that if that's what you're passionate about writing, is something that you've recently uncovered or discovered for yourself, or that means something to you as a person in your life at this moment, that's fantastic. That's great. But we are trying to say, do be aware that there are a lot of people in the world and a lot of people who are moving through life and making similar discoveries. So a little bit of familiarity with what's already out there as far as what's being written on the subjects that you're passionate about or that you're discovering or that you're digging into will go a long way to, at the very least, help the conversation between us as editors and you as writers find that nuance, even if you're not 100% sure where it is. It's a major asset to bring. And if in your pitch you say, hey, the CT's run an article on this, TGC's run an article on this, Sojourners has run an article on this, and here's where I fit in. I mean, that would put your pitch miles ahead of anyone else writing on the same subject. So.
Sophie, Rachel?
You can also take a search of Fathom itself to see what we've already published.
Yes.
Because odds are we have. Happens a lot. And the easiest way to probably do that is to search Fathom magazine on Google with a keyword or two that relates to your article, and just to see if that anything pops up, or just to search the most recent issues one by one. That's also an option.
Yeah. Every issue we get people pitching us content that we published in the previous issue. So at the very least, look through the previous issue.
Yep. And even if it's an excellent piece, if we just talked about it, we're unlikely to talk about it again. Some people will write and ask for feedback on their piece. And it's like, man, you did a great job, or your pitch was excellent. We just can't editorially recreate what we've already just done. So also know that, I guess that's like sort of off topic a little bit, but when you get a response from an editor, there are so many more reasons than you would think that we would not take a piece, right? It isn't just that we didn't like you and we laughed behind your back, because we're not doing that, right? That is not the idea. The idea is we are trying to find the pieces that will best communicate what the author is doing, work together really well in the issue that we are crafting, because we're making editorial decisions on a whole, that we are excited to work with that author maybe again, or to help them craft or kind of hone an idea that they've already shared with us. There are a lot of reasons we might say, hey, this isn't going to work this time around. So just know that it isn't just you every time.
I would add, just going back to showing versus telling, I think a lot of people think that poetry has to be a puzzle, that it needs to hide the meaning. And some poets, that's their thing, that's their shtick. But what I'm looking for is that you are concrete. So even if you have a bit of a puzzle, there needs to be at least a few lines where you're using some plain speak, where it's very clear. I often tell poets, I need somewhere to stand while I'm reading your poem. Where am I? Give me at least one image, one concrete image to stand on so that I can attach the meaning to that. That might sound strange, but give me a place to stand while I read your poem. So do show versus just telling, even in your poetry. And don't confuse being obscure with that being a good poem. That's something that is maybe a taste issue. Some people like poems that are puzzles or that are more obscure. I'm drawn to poems that are more honest and concrete. I think that's what Fathom is looking for.
Excellent. Okay, our next little thing is commit to specificity. The more broad and general an idea or a thought or a concept or a topic or a story is, truthfully, the less memorable it tends to be. And the less, or the harder it is to get your audience to think critically about what you're saying. So the more specific you can be in your pitch and in your actual submission to us, your full manuscript, or even in your poem, the better. In Supper of the Lamb, Capone has this super popular chapter that's talked about all of the time because he writes a whole chapter of a book about cutting an onion. And he talks you through the very beginning of this process of cutting the onion, right? It's so specific. This illustration that he's using is so hyper focused that you can't help but be drawn into what's happening. In the Christian church, we have a habit of speaking very generally and wanting to attack topics from the broadest level instead of the most focused position. We would love to see you have a very focused position, overarchingly, like for your piece to be very specific. We would also love to see your piece be specific in its use of illustrations. So if you are writing a piece and top to bottom, you use a single metaphor, that is more intriguing to me than if you litter it with, like you just turned over a trash can full of metaphors and there's a million in your piece, right? That's actually harder for a reader and an editor to follow. That's so much more work for your reader to sift through mentally. And it's a lot more work for your editor to sift through too, to make sure that all of those are lining up every single time. Specificity and how you write is going to be really important as well. And related to being specific in your piece is that you would be focused in your piece. When you pick a specific idea, keep that focus through the top to bottom of what you're building. That is going to make you drive home all of the beautiful ideas and wonderful thoughts and intriguing new things to consider that you have to tell your audience. Is that focus.
Yeah, and I'll follow that up by saying, if you can't summarize what you are trying to say in your piece in a single sentence that a third grader could understand, you haven't thought through it enough.
Amen.
I get a lot of, we not get a lot of, but we often get pieces where, and I'm like this too. When I write, I externalize first in the writing process, and then I have to look at what I just did and figure out, okay, what the heck am I actually trying to say? So I get that. I 100% understand that perspective of writing. Don't send that to us though. We get those often, and it ends up becoming the editor's job to figure out what it is that the writer is trying to say. And that creates a lot of tension because it's like playing hide and seek with a blindfold on in the dark. You know, I might eventually figure out what is at the heart of what you want to say, but the road to get there is going to be filled with a lot of bumps and bruises and shouts of pain and frustration. So that being said, please do give yourself the time to figure out what is the specific thing that you're trying to say, and can you articulate it quickly and succinctly. And yeah, I think that's all I was trying to say about that.
Yeah, that's great. And early on in Fathom days, one of my very good friends from college is teaching at a Christian college now. And he wrote a piece for us about Tim Tebow. and he sent me the draft, and I had no idea what the point was, and actually edited towards a point that wasn't the one he wanted to make. It was a completely different idea. He got it back and he was like, actually, this is almost the opposite of what I want to say. I was like, well, sorry about that. And we started over, and we reworked on the piece and rewrote it to what his actual idea was. If we had started at the beginning with this is the sentence, this is what it's supposed to mean, it would have not have just helped him with his original work, but it would have helped me edit towards what he wanted to communicate. At the end of the day, our hope is not to communicate simply what we want to communicate. We want to help you say to the reader what it is that is on your mind and heart. Right? God has given you a really interesting way to think about something. We want to help you communicate that as effectively as possible as partners. Specificity helps us do that. Rachel, anything for poems? Sophie, anything? Nope. Great. Okay. The next one, I'm just going to pass right on to the pro of this. Do not write in the present tense.
Yeah, so this is one of my pet peeves in writing, and it was 10 years ago, not as big a deal. Right now, though, it is so faddish that it's gotten to the point where it's almost comical. And what we mean by present tense is a lot of Fathom pieces are narrative driven, right? You're telling your story. You're telling a story of someone you're close to. You're walking through the narrative of the person that you're reporting on or that you interviewed for the piece. Narrative is kind of the heartbeat of Fathom in general, when narrative naturally involves storytelling. Right now, it is incredibly popular to tell stories in the present tense. I walk to the door. I open the door. I look through the door. There on the other side of the door is my dog. That's yeah, I mean, it's kind of chuckle worthy, but you've read it, you've seen it everywhere. It's all over the place. It's in nonfiction, it's in fiction, it's in article length things, it's in novel length things. I mean, it is the narrative voice at the moment, and so we don't want it. I mean, yeah. And I will give you a couple of reasons why specifically. But the big one there is it is absolutely overdone. It's overdone to the degree that it's if I see a piece come through the submissions email that's written in the first person or present tense, which is the absolute biggest no-no, or just present tense in general, I'm most likely just going to dismiss it out of hand. Here's why. Writing in the present tense feels very artistic. It feels immediate, it feels present, it feels like you're inviting the reader into the inner workings of either your main character or you yourself if you're speaking from the first person. It feels intimate. The problem is with that, besides it being overdone, is that it's really difficult to do well. The fact that present tense narration is so common now, and it gets thrown through so many different channels, it means we get really lazy with our storytelling and really lazy with our writing. And what I've found are people who rely exclusively on present tense narration to tell stories end up becoming their storytelling itself becomes weak because they're using the immediacy, the intimacy, and the urgency that's created by present tense narration as a crutch for essentially for doing good writing. Mm-hmm. So prove to me that you can write a fantastic narrative in past tense first, and then we'll talk about moving it into the present tense. Another big reason, besides it being overdone and it covering for bad storytelling, is that it's very difficult to maintain grammatically. When we tell stories, when we're just shooting the breeze with friends and we're talking about what we did last weekend, we tell stories in present tense. Yeah, I came through the door and I'm walking through the door and right there in front of me is my dog. Can you believe it? I mean, he's holding my water bottle in his mouth. And we tell stories like that, but they're short and they're punchy and then they're over. If you sit around a campfire and you're fixing to tell someone an hour-long ghost story, very seldom do you start with, so there he was. Well, I mean, I did it right there. I moved it to past tense. We tell stories once upon a time. We move it back into the past tense. Long form stories are best told in past tense, and it's the way the human brain works to tell those stories. So I've found in pieces that are submitted to us written in present tense, 9 times out of 10, the author fails to maintain present tense through the piece, which then becomes an editing and a proofreading nightmare to make sure that everything is consistent one way or the other. So yeah, that's the short and sweet of it. I have a lot more other thoughts. If you ever wanted to dialogue more about why we don't really want present tense narrative in pieces submitted to Fathom, feel free to shoot me an email. We can talk more about it. But those are the highlights.
Yep. It's great. It's kind of, I think of it like a contemporary art. Like, you know, when you see a Rothko that it looks simple, but it's actually drawing you into the depths of something really beautiful. And then sometimes somebody glues a Hot Wheels to the middle of the canvas and you're like, wait, what happened? And sometimes when we read something in present tense, it feels like somebody glued a Hot Wheels to the middle of the canvas and decided not to work really hard on the craft, on the actual art piece. We're happy to be publishing present tense pieces that feel like the Rothko, and it seems simple, but is truly giving a depth and something extra to the piece that you don't see right at the beginning. But it takes a lot of time to get there. So
I will say this, please don't assume that you're writing the exquisite work if you're pitching us in present tense. Because as soon as Kelsey says that, on my imagination is everyone's going to go, oh, well, that's what I'm doing in this piece. Prove to me that you can tell a fantastic story in past tense first, and then we'll talk about present tense.
Perfect. Okay, speaking of proving it, the next thing is have a thesis and clearly state it in your pitch. Right? A thesis is different than a topic. A topic is the realm of thing you're going to write about. The thesis is the point that you're going to make about that thing. We want to know, you know what you're going to say, right? We talked about that specificity that helps us edit, but that helps you get a piece accepted. It helps you get a piece considered. We are not going to move forward with any piece if we don't know the thesis, right? We can't say, we would love to publish you chatting about coffee cups when you're going to say they should all have a hole in the bottom of them, right? Like it would be silly of us. It would be silly of any publisher to accept a topical piece with no thesis. So we are looking for a thesis every single time. They help you write your piece, like I said, but the other thing they help you do is understand what you're trying to get your audience to react to. We want to give your reader a flashpoint, right? Where they're going to have to engage their own mind in the piece that they're reading. That is your thesis. When they get there, they need to be able to engage with it. So knowing what that is needs to be part of your pitch to us if you're writing, not poetry necessarily, but if you're writing just a regular piece for Fathom, then an article, we're going to want that.
Yeah, I will point out this. If you want to know, because Kelsey's phrase, you need to give audiences something to react to. If you want to know if your thesis does that, ask yourself the question, is this falsifiable? Or can someone argue the opposite of what my thesis just said? And if the answer is no, then it's not a thesis. You're not arguing something. You're not making a point. It has to, I'm not saying you have to take a position on something. You just have to think about what you're trying to say from a perspective that you are taking a stance on it from one degree or another. And that there conceivably could be somebody on the other side who says, I don't agree, and here's why. Does that make sense? That will give you an inclination of whether or not it's going to invite readers to respond to it. If it's so,
we don't want you to be defensive. We want it to be defensible.
Right. Yeah, that's a fantastic way of putting it.
Yeah, and I'll add, if it's just a statement, then it's not a thesis statement. It's exactly what Jed just said, and he's smiling because he taught me this. But you should be able to answer, what am I saying about the thing that I'm saying? So if it is like, if your thesis statement can't be Christians should pray, that's not a thesis statement. You need to give a why behind that. It has to be more than that, not just Christians should pray. It's just that's a statement of fact. not a actual thesis.
That's great. Okay. And the next thing is, if you have a thesis, you need to be able to explain how you're going to argue that, how you're going to get me to believe what you're saying, or to consider what you're saying, or to turn it over in your mind. So when you send in a pitch to us or to anyone else, a thesis and an outline are key for getting in the door. The pitches that we are going to consider first, that we are going to give far more attention to, are the ones that come to us as a thesis and an outline. Pretty frequently, we send emails back to people who pitch with a thesis, and we say, that sounds like a great statement. Can you tell me how you will put that piece together? I would like to see an outline. If you beat us to the punch, you're ahead of the game.
And I will throw out that if you start with the outline, it will make the rejection, if you do get rejected, a lot easier to swallow. There have been instances where we'll have people send in a thesis. We'll ask them, hey, can you show me how you're going to argue this in a short outline? They'll send us the outline. And then in that process, we'll discover, okay, it's kind of what Kelsey mentioned early on. You're taking a track on this that we've either done or we're doing already with some other piece, or you're thinking through the process well, but it's something that's been done a lot elsewhere. And as a result, we're going to have to pass. So if you start with the thesis and the outline, it might save the heartbreak of thinking, oh, maybe we've got, a piece in.
Absolutely. And that helps you give what we asked for earlier, right? The best idea, for you to be able to say, here's my best idea, and outline is going to help us get there.
And
okay.
I will throw one more thing out there, because I've seen this happen a couple of times. An outline is not just a presentation of what you will say, if that makes sense. If your argument is cookies and cream ice cream is the best ice cream because it has both cookies and cream in it, that's your thesis statement. And then your outline is, I'm going to talk about why cookies are great. And then the next point is, I'm going to talk about why ice cream is great. And then the third point is, I'm going to talk about why when you combine them together, it makes the even better. That's not showing the logical argument flow that moves from your premise to your conclusion. So we might be getting a little bit into the technical weeds here, but make sure as you're looking through your outline that each point is building on the last and moving your reader through, or in this case, the editor, as they're looking at your outline, from your premise into your conclusion that validates your thesis. Just a couple bullet points of what you plan to talk about isn't necessarily helpful to us when it comes to understanding how you're approaching a topic.
Yep. Your outline is a chance for you to hook an editor quickly, the way you plan to, in an extended version, hook a reader. Okay, next thing, know your publication's audience and how they like to speak to that audience. Every publication out there gets really good even pitches for pieces that do not fit their publication because it's not to their reader. Right? If you told me you wanted to write to 13-year-olds, I would tell you they do not read Fathom, right? That's an excellent place that you will never, or excellent piece, but we are not the place. You won't reach them that way. You need to understand who the audience is, and then spend some time looking at the kinds of pieces that that publication does publish in order to see how they talk to that audience. There are, the how is just as important as who the audience is. There are publications out there that want to do confirmation for their audience. They know how they think, they already know what they believe, and what they want to do is give them a reason to keep thinking that way, keep believing that thing, to further them in a position that they already hold, right? There are ways to write to that end that are really helpful. And I think a lot of us love to read things like that help us reconfirm something that we already hold. At Fathom, that is not how we approach our audience. We consider our audience to be really thoughtful. They're curious Christians who just really desire to craft a multifaceted life of faith. And to do that, they want us to help them engage their own mind. They want or they want to connect with an artful experience that gets them turning over something in a new way that they haven't before. Yeah, they want to be contemplative. And if we give them what they already think and what they already know or they've already experienced, then we're not actually accomplishing what our reader is after. So what we're hoping to do is find work that challenges their expectations, that asks them not to reinforce an idea, but to grow it, to consider a new angle to it, to think about a Bible text in a different way than they usually have, instead of applying a Bible text the way that they probably already think about it to a situation today, right? The amount of pieces that we have been submitted on the Good Samaritan truly feels uncountable. And almost none of them have a different version of looking at that story. So we want people, we want our submissions. We would love to see our submission box filled up with pitches that match the way that we think about our audience. So every publication wants that. They want you to have sat down, thought about their people in particular, and have sent them an idea that matches what they do. Right? If you send me a pitch that says 5 ways to, I'm not reading it anymore. We have published maybe 3 of those in the 5-year history of Fathom. We don't do that. That's not how we speak to our audience, right? So it's just a really easy no on our end, not because you didn't do the work, not because your thoughts aren't valid, because that doesn't fit our audience and how we talk to them. So know that when you jump into the piece. I think that's just a really good thing to keep in mind when you are trying to pitch a piece you've already written, generally to lots of publications, right? Some of those are going to fit. You're going to write something that will fit across different types of platforms at some point. But if you write a piece and then you just send it to 20 places, expect 19 or 20 rejections, because they're going to be able to tell that that piece is not for them. So getting specific on who their audience is and how they talk to them is going to help you go way further than just considering how you want to talk to somebody, because it is a partnership between you as a writer and the publication.
I'll throw this out there too. Fathom's audience primarily is not the boomer generation.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that I say that is in the last 4 years, there's been a lot of Christian writing in the writing sphere that's pushing back against the boomer perspective of Christianity, especially in the United States. Those pieces are useful and they are helpful and they are needed, but they end up kind of speaking to the choir at Fathom because our readers are primarily in the generation that's already doing that, already pushing back against that perspective of the Christian faith, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So in order to continue challenging our audience to think deeper, to be curious, to be contemplative, consider what you're writing in the terms of how you would talk to Gen X or millennials or Gen Z and their perspective of Christianity, if that makes sense. Again, it's not a universal reality. It's not a hard, fast line in the sand, but generally speaking, I think you'll find a lot more success with what Kelsey's talking about if you recognize that we're primarily read by Gen X and down as far as their perspective on Christianity and practical in the practical implementation of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we get quite a few pitches that want to advocate for someone to be politically moderate. And I'd be like, well, we don't need that to be advocated for, because it's kind of who reads us. And that is, we're already talking to those people. They already agree with you. And since we're not the place to just be like, you're to be reestablishing what you already believe, those aren't for us. So things like that. If you just think through how we work, how Christianity Today works, how Gospel Coalition works, how Sojourners works, how Stasis works, whatever you're going to pitch to, you'll be in a great place to get started. Okay. The next thing, which we're almost done with our little how to catch an editor's eye piece, is revise your piece before you send it to a publication, before you send it. before you send it to us, you need to write and rewrite your sentences so that they're characterized by being strong sentences, right? We'll have people who are like, well, this is my first draft, but I know you can help me editorially. It's like, man, I can help you editorially, but you could help you editorially first. And I want to see that you're willing to work on your craft. Not that you have no questions, not that you don't need any help. We don't necessarily need a piece to come to us with that we don't have to touch at all editorially. It's definitely not what I'm saying, but we for sure would like to see you work hard to craft something beautiful and logical and structured and well thought out and engaging before you just hit send to us to help you do that thing. The ways that you can do that is primarily you need a really good reader before you submit to us. Find a group of people who either are writers or who you know to be thoughtfully engaged readers to read your piece before you send it to us, to give you some possible edits and their thoughts and their feedback that you can then work in to what you're doing. Even if you get a piece in that has to have a whole lot of work that you haven't done this with before, editors will remember that, right? So us or anybody else, if they have had to bend over backwards to get a piece editorially to where it needs to be, your next pitch is probably not going to get a lot of consideration, right? It's probably just going to be really hard for you to get in a second time. That was a one and done type thing for you, unfortunately. Maybe find a writers group. Hope Writers, I think, opens twice a year, maybe 3 times a year to new writers. There's Jonathan Rogers has the Habit membership. You can go in and get a group that will help you develop your ideas and hone your craft through all kinds of writers groups. There's a local writers groups here in Dallas. We have Art House Dallas, and they create little writers groups out of those people who come regularly to Art House. There's Rockwell Christian Writers group, that's what it's called. They have like a Facebook group for you to be a part of, and then they get together, I think, once a month for you to run your ideas past them and read things. But having that reader and that editorial mind on your piece before it gets to us is going to save you a lot of work and heartache. And it's also going to get you just like in really well with the editors, right? They're going to want to come back to you to write another piece. So do your very best to have someone else get eyes on it.
I would add with poetry, poetry is a little different in the sense that, like I said, no pitch is necessary, but also I've found poets to be very averse to changing anything. And I get it because I'm a poet. You're so, your word choice is very intentional. And so for me to ask you to correct even one word in your poem is actually a pretty big deal, right? If you're a poet, you know it is. So I'm not saying that all the poets are stubborn, but we kind of are. And so having said that, you really do want to send me a polished piece that you know that that's how you want it to sound. It doesn't mean I'm not going to ask you to change something, but don't send me a piece in progress. And the other thing I would say is make sure to read your poem out loud. And even if you're not a spoken word artist, because in general, we publish just the words. Every once in a while, we'll publish a video with it, but think like a spoken word artist as you read the poem, and make sure that your commas and your line breaks and all those things will lead the reader to read your poem the way you want it to be read. So that will require you reading it out loud a few times, and maybe even having someone else read it out loud to you, and you can hear if they are being led correctly, right? If they're pausing in the place you want them to pause. If they're not, maybe you need a line break, maybe you need a comma. So read it out loud many times and have someone else read it.
Y'all good? Bridget, Sophie?
Yeah, no, I think having eyes on your piece is great.
Excellent. Okay, then the last one is make the editor's job easier. The amount of pieces that come through an editor's email box is probably more than you could imagine. being. It just gets filled very, very quickly. And it's a job just to go through submissions, let alone to edit pieces, get back to the ones you're actually going to publish. Sometimes we have had to push an issue out just because there's so many submissions, we can't even get through them all before in the timeline that we generally would have thought we would have had to. So doing everything that you can to make getting through your submission in a good and positive way is going to help you get your foot in the door. That's simple things like formatting a document so that it's easy to read, right? Give me a double spaced or a space or 1.5 spaced document. It's easier for me to read that. I can read that a lot faster than when you have the single space right on top of it, right on top of each other document. That seems like a silly little thing, but it's gonna make you look professional. And if you've put in your header your last name and maybe a page count or a word count in that header, I know what I'm getting into from the second I open it, and I'm committing to what I'm seeing. Man, that's so helpful too. So format that document so that the editor can run through it really easily. Give your piece a working title. Give your piece a working title. I would say only 30% of the things that come our way have a title attached to them. They have a topic, even if they have a thesis, even if they have an outline, they don't have a title. A title helps me understand if what the way you're thinking about your piece is lining up with your thesis. And if it doesn't have a thesis, it actually helps me know maybe what you are trying to accomplish with that piece. Title is actually really important. It's very likely that it changes. Very few titles make it through beginning to end because there are a lot of things that go into picking a title. Everything from we want it to be intriguing to it needs to show up in SEO results, right? Or maybe your title was just really too general or is the same as something else that we published in the past. So there are a lot of reasons why we will change the title, but give it a working title. Help us out a little bit there. And then be patient. Be so patient. We'll get people who send in a submission and 48 hours later, they're like, I don't know if you got my submission. It's like, oh man, we probably got it. We get most of them. And if I didn't technically get it, then I'm going to see it in a few days time when it comes through in my spam report, right? I'm going to most likely find it. We have had issues, things fall through the cracks. That is definitely something that can happen. And following back up is a good thing if you haven't heard from anybody in like a month, but you need to give actual weeks to editorial teams to get through their inboxes. Sometimes they've seen it and we really are working to build an issue where things work together. They might really have liked your piece and would love to include it if it's going to fit in the issue as a whole, right? So just be patient. We haven't forgotten about you. You're thinking about your one piece and we're thinking about the hundreds that came in over the past 3 months, right? So just change your expectations maybe a little bit. And then lastly, assume that your editor is your partner. Never assume they're your enemy, right? The publisher, the editor specifically that you're working with, they want the best for your work, right? No one is looking to, or very rarely are you ever going to come across an editor, certainly you will not come across one at Fathom, who is looking to leverage you for their own good and not yours, right? This partnership should be good for everyone. We are looking to just get arm in arm with you as we further the kingdom of God, right? That is the idea. So when we send back edits or thoughts or ask you to make changes, none of that is not without your good in mind, just as much as your good in mind as it is ours. But we do also ask you to consider that we are also working for our good too, right? So if you have a really great idea that you have written in a tone that is just not going to match the way that we do things, and we ask you to rewrite it, that is going to be hopefully for your good, but also ours too. So we want to find that place where we're just for each other all of the time. We are your partner, not your enemy.
Make sure to attach your piece.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Just because so often we get the email, the pitch, and then when we finally get back to you, it's maybe has been weeks and then we still haven't seen it. And then, so just double check that you sent it. And it always helps if you send a 1-sentence bio with, I don't want to speak for the essays, but definitely with the poems, just because that's a back and forth. If we do publish your poem, I will be asking you for a bio. So it helps to send it in the original email.
Mhm. Agreed. That is super helpful. Okay, anything else? Rachel, poetry wise, so anything you want to add? Sophie, Jed?
I get questions a lot about why we don't include more rhyming poems.
Hmm.
And there's obviously an extent to which, you know, there's a style that I prefer as the poetry editor, but it's not that I think negatively of rhyming poems. It's that kind of like what Jed was saying about writing in the present tense. It's very hard to rhyme well and have it not be distracting. And so that's the real reason. If you're wondering why, man, they publish all this free verse and I only see a rhyming poem every other issue. Or if all you do is rhyme and you keep getting rejected, it's not that we're anti-rhyme, but you really do have to have it perfect. Otherwise, the reader will be very distracted by you choosing a word because it rhymed rather than you choosing a word because it was the right word. So that's my thought on the rhyming question, because I think some people have been a little bit offended and thought that we're just anti-rhyme. Nope, you just have to be good at it. Trying to think if there's anything else. Kelsey, you had mentioned tackling a biblical text in a new way. I love when poems do that as well. So poems that are preachy, that's not for our audience, but poems that, even talk about a Bible character in a new way. Imagine something about them that could be true. Or the best
Russ
poem.
Ramsey wrote a beautiful one of those for us.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Maybe we can link to that if I can find it.
I think it's called Sarah.
Yes, I think you're right. That is a really good poem. Comparing two dissimilar things is a poet's best friend, right? I mean, that's what a metaphor is, but your whole poem could be comparing two dissimilar things that when they're compared, it gives you a totally fresh new look at that topic. So those are just a few poetry tips.
Yeah, I think Kelsey did a good job summing up everything that we're kind of hoping for, but also just to reiterate, everything that Kelsey's mentioned this evening will be your friend pitching to any publication. This isn't necessarily just Fathom. Fathom has its own very strict standards for what we are and are not looking for. These are just general ideas that when you're wanting to get published in any format, really, these things will all be a massive ally as you approach the endeavor. And then the unique thing about Fathom, and this is one of the reasons why I treasure the opportunity to continue working with it, is that as a group of editors, we're committed to helping you grow as a writer too. We're not looking for the absolute perfect polished writer who never ever needs edits and throws things out there like confetti and it lands like gold. We're looking for people who will grow into the kind of people that Fathom wants to cultivate, not just in our readers but also in our writers. So recognize that that's our hope for you as a writer, is to continue to grow, to flex your muscles, to discover writing muscles you didn't know you have. And if it hurts a little bit, if it brings some tears looking through a page filled with edits, sometimes that's not a bad thing. It's an okay thing. And at the end of it is the goal of helping you grow as a person and as a writer.
Yep.
On a less sentimental note, I'm going to send some links to the chat for you guys that'll be really helpful. The first is an article that Jed wrote a while ago called "Don't Freak Out," and it'll give you some kind of general information about writing a pitch and what to expect from an editor. I'm going to send a link to our style guide, which you should definitely skim through before you send us anything. If you're not on the contributors email list already, I'm going to send a link for you to sign up for that. And then I'll also send a link for just general information about submissions. We've kind of covered everything in this meeting already, but I'm going to send those out right now. Hopefully it all pasted. Let me know if it did it.
Perfect.
I'll send you guys one that I wrote about poetry submissions too. Feel the rhythm, feel the rhyme.
I already linked it. It's higher up in the I sent it right before the
Sophie's
poem.
got it.
That's right. With the pro.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a couple questions come through the chat. One of them was direct to me, and maybe a couple of them were actually, I think. Okay, so one is, Jed talked about how we typically aren't, our audience is primarily millennial or younger, not boomer. And so the question was, are you not open to boomers as writers then? And I would say, oh, we definitely are. Like, we just 1,000% are open to boomers as writers. I can't actually think of an issue we haven't had a boomer as a writer. It's everywhere in what we publish. That isn't about who is writing, it is about who we are writing to. And truly our audience could use quite a big helping of the perspective from the generation above them, above me, above all of us on this team. So please send us pieces. Don't ever consider yourself out because maybe you're not the majority of what the audience is. Your perspective will be so super helpful. I can't just emphasize it enough. I won't say it again, but yeah, that's right. You're in. Welcome to the group. Submit. Another one is, what kind of word counts are you looking for? Jed, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so there's a sweet spot between this is too long to read and I'm bored and this feels like a blog post. And we've discovered that's between 1,000 and 1,500 words. You go over 1,500 words, you're going to have to earn it. My recommendation is, if you plan to develop an idea or a thesis over a longer chunk of text from 1,500 to 2,000, you're going to absolutely need subheadings. You're going to have to clearly be able to show in your writing the movement of thought from beginning to end. It's going to require a lot more work. Most people I've discovered they're not passionate enough about the piece that they're writing on to spend the months that's usually required to create a longer form piece and really think through, make it tight, make it read well, make it argue well. So we kind of ask to stick to less than 1,500 words, but more than 1,000. The big reason why at 800 words, I've discovered people run out of things to say about the thing they're writing, and then they just stop. The problem is inevitably the part that gets left out is the part that the reader is most interested in. And that's so what am I supposed to do with everything you just told me in the previous 800 words? So my recommendation is, if in your writing you find that you keep landing on around the 800 word mark, which again, I found is very, very common, ask yourself, okay, have I actually led my reader to a point where they have something to do as a result of having engagement? It's one of the reasons why we look for about 1,000 words, because those extra 200 words give you the room to really land the plane, so to speak. Fiction, short stories. We're one of the few publications out there that take pretty much every kind of writing as it is right now, which is a cool opportunity for y'all. If you're into short stories, I don't want to see less than 3,000 words. We typically cap it at around 6,000. Kelsey, I don't think we've ever run anything that's over that.
No.
Just for readability's sake. But the reason that our lower limit is around 3,000 is because I found it takes about that to tell a good short story. You need room to breathe. Your characters need room to breathe and to grow and to mature a little bit. Short stories are a fantastically compact narrative form, but you do need a little bit of space to do that. So those are, generally speaking, I think, our word counts. So 1,000 to 1,500 for articles, 3,000 to 6,000 for short stories. And then Rachel can tell you what she wants in poems. I'm not going to set a word limit on this.
If you make it work, I'm not worried about how long the poem is. It just needs to work. So, yeah. I guess I should cap it, but.
I will say this. If you have a long form article, like an Atlantic length piece that you've been working on and you've been developing, you've been researching, you've been interviewing for, and it's something that you've really you're invested in and that's what you want to pitch, don't assume that we're just going to dismiss it out of hand,
For
but
sure.
do know that we're going to expect that it's a very well done piece at that length.
Our feature piece in the last issue was almost 3,000 words. And that's super abnormal for us, but it was the feature piece for a reason. And she had crafted a story that was worth telling and worth asking the reader for. Anything over 1,500 words, you really are asking for something for from the reader they're not typically willing to give you. You know what? I would just love it if attention spans were for 3,000 word pieces. Wouldn't that be awesome? But truly they are not. And so they have to be able to capture your reader and keep them. We want them to know that we're going to give them excellent work in that 1,000 to 1,500 word that they want to read. And then if we give them a 3,000 word piece, we have their trust that it's worthwhile. It's worth their time. Do you receive international writers, and to what extent are you looking for voices outside the Western experience? Oh my gosh, yes, and please help us. That's all I have. Yes. Okay.
I have a question from Donna for you, Kelsey.
Great.
She asked, if someone has published an essay on their own personal blog, could it be submitted to Fathom for publication?
It can be. We prefer to have pieces that have not been published. If you have a personal blog that's just probably a handful of your friends and it's not like widely circulated, we'd be happy to consider it. It might be the kind of thing that if you've had a blog post that has done really well, that you take it and rework it for a Fathom piece. And you can tell us, I wrote a piece that's like this and I reworked it for your audience, right? Blogs don't tend to be the kind of communication that we use here. So it's very possible that if you have a blog post that did great, it's just not the tone of a Fathom piece, and you would need to rework it. So that would be what I would say. We'd do that.
Yeah, and
Same thing with other places. If you have published it somewhere else, we probably aren't going to publish that. It's actually a very popular piece on TGC and Desiring God. That was actually first a Fathom piece, and it's like drives me crazy that it looks like we did it later. We didn't. We did it first. So if you find it, you can know.
And just
challenge.
Just as a friendly tip, as far as like publishing etiquette is concerned, if you do run a piece with Fathom and then want to run it somewhere else, if you would let us know that is what you would desire to do, it would help us be able to work through what the ramifications are that. And it's for the same reason Kelsey just mentioned. Again, there's no necessarily legal stipulations involved in any of this, but from an etiquette standpoint in the publishing world, you will go far if you give your publications the respect of giving them first right of refusal on a piece before you move on to another publication, or if you would like to republish a piece with someone else, working through that with the publication that ran it the first time. So just generally speaking, it's good etiquette.
I have a follow-up question from Paige. She asks, can you describe what it means that you don't take pieces that have a blog tone, like more conversational, short? What's the idea? Just a little more specific, I think.
Yeah, Jed, you want to jump in?
So in blogs tend to be driven primarily by the personality of the person writing them. Fathom is unique in, well, I won't say unique, but our voice does lend itself toward personal narrative. But there is a distinctness there. Our personal narrative, the pieces that we publish that are driven by personal narrative still have a thesis. They're still making an argument. They're still providing evidence toward that argument, even if it's anecdotal and based on the author's life experiences. It's still well worded, it's still well argued, and it moves from thought to thought to thought to a final conclusion that asks something of the reader. Generally speaking, blogs don't do that. Generally speaking, blogs tend to be more musings about life, more scattered thoughts. Here are some things I as I was walking down the forest path today and tripped over a log and landed face first into a puddle, and I glanced up to see the sun coming through the trees, I thought about the grace of God. That's the kind of tone blogs tend to take. And while those are great for personal musings, that's not what we're looking for at Fathom. So if you have a blog post or a blog idea that you've run with before, what Kelsey's essentially trying to say is you've got to still work it through the same process as any other piece. Make sure it's got a thesis, make sure it makes an argument, make sure it's well written, it's argued well, it invites the reader to ask questions themselves. It has a single idea. You're not musing about several different concepts. That's the real trick of converting blog-ish content to publishable content as far as Fathom's concerned. And I think you'll find that with a lot of other publications as well.
Yeah, a blog tone typically asks you to be smitten with the writer instead of smitten with the idea. And we want you to be smitten with the idea. Anything else, Sophie?
One question from earlier, and I think this might be covered in our previous call, so we don't need to go into it super in depth, and we've kind of covered a lot of it here, but what exactly should a pitch be like? What should be in a pitch specifically? We've talked about like thesis and outline, but we haven't talked about like order and things like that.
The
Jed,
10-second answer to that question is give me your absolute best writing in the first 1, 2, or 3 sentences. It could be the first couple sentences from your piece itself, but give me just grab me by the eyeballs and make me want to publish your piece with your first couple of sentences. I don't want to hear who you are in the first couple sentences. I don't want to hear why I should publish your piece. I certainly don't want to see, hey, here's a thing I wrote. Hope you guys like it. Use your absolute best writing to grab me by the eyeballs and say, you need to read this. First paragraph, 1, 2, or 3 sentences. You don't need any more than that. Second paragraph, tell me what it is you're going to say and how you're going to say it. That's where you introduce your thesis. And if you want to give me a bulleted outline, great. That's fine. My recommendation is that you do. Third paragraph, again, we're not talking about chunks of text here. We're talking about 2 or 3 sentences. Third paragraph, then you can tell me who you are and what your creds are for publishing or writing about the subject that you're writing about. And a word to the wise here, the more you try to force me to publish your piece because of your credentials, the less likely I am going to be inclined to publish your piece. So if you come in and you say, I've been published in this location, and this location, and this location, and I've done all this, and I'm a writer here, and I've done all this, and therefore you must, it would behoove you to, I'll be like, thanks, no thanks. Clearly you have success elsewhere. Fathom is not a home for you. Instead, my recommendation in that would be, tell me why your perspective on the subject that you've just pitched me, where does it come from? Does it come from your educational background? Does it come from your lived experience? If you're writing a story about raising Great Danes in the hill country of West Virginia, I hope that that paragraph includes, I have 4 Great Danes and I live in the hill country of West Virginia, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to.
That sounds like a great piece, by the way.
I know, right? So it doesn't have to be your publishing creds. Just tell me what part of life you're coming from that has given you the insight to approach the topic that you're trying to write. So I say that because we often have writers who say, well, I haven't been published anywhere. I haven't gone to school for writing. I don't have a lot of experience doing this in a formal setting. That's fine. We publish people like that all the time. But you do have experience with your subject to one degree or another. So tell me where that is. That's third paragraph. And then throw in details at the end. If it's not a written piece, tell me how quickly you can get it to me once we give you a green light. Tell me what your word count is that you plan on hitting, and then any sort of other nitty-gritty details. If you read the article that I wrote, don't freak out. All of that's there for you in a little bit more detail. But
yeah, and I would add. Oh, go ahead.
2 things to not do. Do not shame the person receiving the submission. Well, I've pitched 4 times and been rejected, so I'm not sure why I'm pitching you again. It's like, oh gosh, like, don't make us feel bad. like we said, there's a million reasons why something might not have fit. We're for you. And one of those reasons, right, might be that you need to find a writers group and get your ideas honed and get your pieces honed and that kind of thing. But just so you know, shaming isn't going to get you anywhere. Neither is spiritual manipulation. God told me I wrote a piece for Fathom. Is a lot of pressure for us, right? Don't put us in the position to be like, God was wrong, right? That is not something we're interested in. So don't spiritually manipulate us. Don't shame us. I mean, you're welcome to tell us you love Fathom, but we definitely don't need a paragraph of over flattery either. Yeah, so those would be my watch outs. Certainly do not send an email that has a Google Doc link and that is it. I'm not clicking that link. I'm not reading it.
I was just going to say, we love to publish unpublished authors. I mean, that's something that's special about Fathom. So your credentials are great, but they really aren't what sells it. There's a line my husband and I always sing. It's by David Ramirez. The best writer I ever met was a plumber down in Arkansas. I think that's how.
Love that line.
But I mean, that's true. And what Jed said, you know, we want you writing from your experience and your heart, and having a PhD really isn't what makes the difference.
In fact, we're probably less likely to publish you if you lead with, I have a PhD in.
Yes,
fill in blank.
I would agree.
Unless your PhD is in raising Great Danes in West Virginia. I got a space for you in our next issue.
Someone's going to write that piece now. This is
I
great.
know, I can't wait.
All right. Okay, speaking of pieces to write, we have 3 upcoming themes. So the next issue is family. Submissions deadline for that is August 23rd. That's coming for you. We'd love to have some more submissions on family. We don't have a ton yet necessarily, so I would love to see some more submissions on that. Some things to think about that would be interesting for family. You all have a family history story, right? So when you were thinking about telling your story, we're still looking for that specificity and that unique angle and having something to say. Don't just tell me your story, right? So think very specifically about it, but also that idea of family can insert its way into lots of different categories of life. It can insert its way into lots of different ways of thinking about the church as a family. One thing that I was thinking about today, Anthony Bradley actually tweeted about how the evangelical church does a poor job of including other Christian traditions in their understanding of the Bible. Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, mainline, how they don't consider the academic thoughts outside of their own specific area of thinking. That's a way to discuss family. That is an angle to talk about how the Christian faith is a family, and how we benefit from one another from different Christian traditions, how we benefit from the history, the rich family history that we have. You could even, if like you're going to write a Bible-based article for us on family, I would love to see a piece on genealogies. I would love it. Like, that would be fantastic. The genealogy in Matthew 1 and the genealogy in Genesis, talking about Noah's family, are 2 of my favorite pieces of scripture. I would be thrilled to see something around those. Yeah, so something like that would be great.
Do be aware that the editorial staff at Fathom is very highly theologically trained. So not a lot gets past our BS meters as far as that's concerned. So if you do choose to write on a biblical topic, theological topic, please do your research and show your work, and if necessary, cite your sources.
Love that. Yeah, and as another example of things, like interesting way to think about things, I bet a lot of y'all are listening to Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. If I had to guess, at least 50% of you on here probably listened to at least one episode, and it's excellent. What wouldn't be great is a piece pitched to us that's like, I'm listening to this podcast and it's excellent. That's not actually an excellent way to approach something that's excellent. We would like you to do better than that. But if you listened to the episode on what we do to our women about hypermasculinity and how women were expected to form their lives and how they were expected to operate in the church. And what you wanted to do was write us a piece about how marriage rates have gone down while evangelical church started talking about hypermasculinity going up. That would be an interesting way to bring in that episode of the podcast and to say, I was listening to this and I thought about this, X, Y, and Z. So I researched and found quotes from people who aren't getting married until later in life because they didn't like the position of women taught to them in the church or something like that, right? There is a way to engage with cultural artifacts around you and talk about why and what it is that is making you think further as you listen to them. Bring somebody else into your learning experience. So if you want to talk about rise and fall or anything else, there's a lot of family angles in that and in some other things that are popular right now. Give that a specific look. Let's see. Unconventional or unlikely family or a family bond is another thing you could write about. Are there tough stories the family of God needs to wrestle with? Which is probably true, right? So I'll talk about some of those things. What about Jesus' family or weird, unusual families in the Bible, right? You could write even about adoption in the Bible from a different angle than God adopts us into his family. We're a family, right? I would love a nuanced understanding of adoption that is a thoroughly researched and well understood aspect from the scriptures, things like that. Anybody else want to add in anything for family?
Family is one of those things that, again, in recent years has kind of come under almost a harsh kind of criticism. At least like the traditional family, in quotes. I would love to see a piece that looks at the traditional family through the circle that we've gone through of understanding why the church prioritizing it over other relationships has been harmful and destructive, but a piece that shows the redemptive arc that can come around and show talk about what is still valuable in a traditional family and how can a traditional family, understanding all of the baggage it brings now within the church, move forward into a healthier way of operating as a traditional family within the church or within relationships to other people who may not find themselves in the family that they want or need or have been looking for. So something that I think that's, again, one of those things. It's really easy right now to there's a lot of hot button topics in Christianity, evangelical Christianity in the West, that it's really easy to take pot shots at. Mm-hmm. If you can show how you can take the thing that everyone's shooting at and turn it back into something that's beautiful and redeemable and valuable, that will go, that would be awesome. I'd love a piece like that.
Yep. And back to the idea of a non-Western perspective, on family would be fantastic. Friendship. The submissions deadline for that is September 6th. I think friendship is probably one of the more neglected topics in the church. I think we should talk more about friendship. We talk about community, but primarily the idea that we put under community is that they're going to be people different from you that you don't enjoy. So suck it up and have community with them because they love Jesus too. And that's a perspective that is valid. But this idea of deep friendship, I would love to see us really knock that out of the park. That is actually also the issue that will be Fathom's 5th anniversary. So just a heads up, and that'll be October. Fathom will turn 5. So y'all want to throw in some things? Sophie, you want to talk about any of them in this little category?
Sorry, I was on mute.
You're
on
great.
Friendship? On friendship?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot here that I think has a lot of potential to be really unique and interesting. I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking, well, what would make a pitch really interesting? And I was thinking, like, what if you wrote us about, like, you know, those like classic, you know, TikToks or reels where it's like a grandpa becoming friends with like a little girl next door and they're like picking flowers together, like something like that, where it's like a really unusual friendship that you've observed or experienced what did you learn from that? Just something that's a little more unique, not just like me and my best friend went on a road trip, which might be also great. What did you learn? What was unique about that experience? But I think there's a whole lot of untapped potential with the topic of friendship. And then I also thought about the idea of what if you brought the idea of friendship in with another theological idea? Like, how does friendship play a role in hospitality or generosity or things like that? So would love to see all those things.
Mhm.
We talk about marriage a
that.
lot in terms of covenantalism. If you want to do a piece on covenants, friendship covenants in the Bible, I want to read it. Commitments that people make that are platonic, but still with the same virtual binding force of the kind of promises that we see within a marriage covenant or with God to his people, and what that looks like, and then what that practically means for how we approach friendships or can approach friendships in the modern era, I think would be a fascinating approach too.
I will say too that there are a lot of pieces out there in the world that talk about singleness and friendship and the importance of that and how we need to bring back singleness to the church, or bring back friendship to the church as a remedy for, single people feeling left out. There's a lot of pieces like that, and that's not a bad thing to talk about, but I would love to see something more unique and a unique twist or a spin on that idea. And especially like, what about, can single people be friends with married people? That's also talked a lot about, but is there a unique angle, a unique way you can tackle it? It'd be intriguing for us to see.
I like that. That's great. Okay, and the last one is harmony. The deadline for that is October 5th. The deadlines are for your pitch and your submission. That's not the final deadline for your full piece, but we will be asking pretty quick turnaround for your full piece. So just be aware that after we get those submissions, we'll be hoping that you're not going to be like, it'll take me 4 weeks to write it, right? We're hoping you've done a lot of the work already because you're pitching us, you know what you're going to say to some degree, and that piece will come together, less than 2 weeks time. But so the heads up there. But the last one is harmony. I'm thinking about this kind of musically, not necessarily just as in another word for unity. So there's a lot of, when we think about harmony, this idea that we need difference together to make something beautiful. There are a ton of different angles for you to approach harmony with. We could actually talk about real music. You could talk about worship music. You could talk about what you see in the church today, that's what's good and what is not helpful as far as music goes. We could talk about new heavens and new earth. That's a great one. So if you talk about that a little bit, you put that on this list. I like that.
I was just thinking of random ideas. The new heavens, new earth is maybe one of my favorite topics in the whole wide world. I love talking about it. I think it's super fascinating. And this idea, that's presented in the prophets about, the lion will lay down with the lamb, blah, blah, blah. And that's an idea, a picture of harmony. What is that, what can you do with that metaphor? Can you maybe think about it from a different angle, a different idea? Is there another metaphor you could bring up to kind of give us an idea around new heavens and new earth? Not just like the classic ripoff of C.S. Lewis of the the Chronicles of Narnia book. Would love to hear creative ideas around that.
And insofar as harmony is concerned, dissonance is a large part of what makes harmony beautiful. So as you think through possible topics, not from a literal standpoint and dissonance and harmony in music, but what does it look like? What does a harmonious thing look like in the human experience that incorporates dissonance into the fabric of its beauty? I would love to see some explorations of that.
Excellent. Okay, try to answer some questions real quick and get y'all out of here. Sophie, where are you? I wasn't been paying attention.
I've been answering questions in the chat. So if I answered incorrectly, I'm so sorry. Let's see. Yes, I put the deadlines for the pitch submissions in the chat. I'll post them again. yeah, because I got a lot of questions about that. And then there were some questions about our audience, if they're majority evangelical and have backgrounds in interdenominational churches. And I said, yeah, a lot of them are, but I would just say the more general umbrella is thoughtful Christians, because we're not all, I wouldn't say it's all evangelical.
Mhm.
And then I had some people asking about if talking about foster care in the family issue would be something we'd be interested in. And I said, yeah. And then I pointed them to there's a CT article that they wrote about foster care and singleness a few months ago. That was a very great example of a very unique angle. So that would be great. I answered this one already, but we can talk about it too. When we pitch, do you prefer a piece that's already been written, or one that you just send the outline for and hasn't been written yet, or doesn't matter?
A lot of it depends on the amount of work you've done on one or the other. I will take a well thought out pitch and outline any day over a poorly thought out completed piece. And if you've done good work on a completed piece and you've put the time in to make that gorgeous, I will happily take that as well. But to reiterate what Kelsey said, when we give you the green light to write a piece that's not currently written, we will be looking at a 7 to 10 day horizon for turnaround on that. There's exceptions to every rule, and there's grace to be extended, but generally speaking, so if you're a person who prefers to take more time on the writing component of it, then my recommendation would be to consider writing the piece out beforehand. Or if so we've just given you the next 3 months worth of ideas. If you pitch us a harmony piece this week and we say, hey, this is great, let's run with it, then you've got 3 months to work with, and then you spend way more time than if you hit us on the deadline right before the issues due to come out.
Yep. Okay, any more questions? Give y'all a second. I'm not seeing any come through. Are you, Sophie?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Not really. We have emails. Kelsey at fathommag.com, Jed at fathommag.com, Rachel at fathommag.com, and Sophie at fathommag.com. It's very straightforward. You can get a hold of us whenever you want. You can send your pitches to submissions at Fathom Mag. That is the best option for you to send in something. If you send something straight in to Jed or Rachel or me or Sophie, copy the submissions email, because that means someone's going to get it. Submissions at Fathom Mag, that's right there. Put it right there. Thank you so much. Yep, that's your best bet. And we are looking forward to seeing your pitches, and would love to hear if you used any of this and got accepted somewhere else too, because that's our hope, is just that we would see writing in the Christian world get better everywhere. So thank y'all so much for coming. We